Hi, welcome to the Armed Guardian podcast. Today, David, Crystal, and I have a guest, Riley Bowman, on, and we're going to talk about competition shooting and how it can help you in a training method for your concealed carry. So, without further ado, hey Riley, how you doing, sir?
I'm great, thank you. Appreciate you having me on.
I appreciate you, and it's a topic that I thought could be very beneficial to new shooters and even the seasoned shooters to stay on top of their game and maybe even have fun while they're doing that training. And uh, I felt that you were the best qualified from the people that I knew of that could answer these questions. So I appreciate your time today. So, who is Riley Bowman, and give us a little bit of your background if you don't mind, please, sir.
Yeah, well, I'll start off by saying that first, I'm I think of myself as a father of five ch beautiful children, husband to my wife,
Mhm.
uh, business partner with Jacob, and everything that we got going on at concealedcarry.com, which over the years, over 8 years, we've been doing this full time now, has grown more and more and more. Um, Yeah, and along with that, adding a whole bunch of brands. I'll come back to some of those here in a minute, just so people know what those all are. But about 18 years ago or so, I got my oldest son at 17, and I just remember thinking when we were expecting our first child that I should probably take the defense of my family a little bit more seriously than I had up to that point. I would say I was a very casual, gun owner, certainly believe in outdoors stuff and hunting and fishing and the Second Amendment and all that. I grew up in a rural community, grew up shooting, learning how to shoot from uncles and grandfathers and other family members, and but decided to get more serious about it. Like I said, about the time we were expecting my firstborn, and so it's pretty easy to remember that timeline because, like I said, he's 17 and not that far away from being an adult himself. But about 12 or 13 years ago, I got into teaching concealed carry classes. This was after, practicing concealed carry myself and getting some training and learning some things for a few years. Um, Started teaching the classes. That's how I got linked up with Jacob actually originally. And then I just kept pursuing the opportunities. I wanted to get better. I wanted to know more. I felt like it was my responsibility, my duty as an instructor to be informed and up to date on the latest and greatest, information, concealed carry related shooting, self-defense, etc. We'll see, 2016, I had the opportunity to compete in a televised competition on an outdoor channel called American Marksman. It was a 2 episode series on Outdoor Channel. I didn't, don't worry. You don't have to, I mean, you can go watch it. I think it's a cool show. I'm in there all of, I don't know, like 30 seconds or something. There's a lot of people, but I did make it all the way to the finals on that as far as the national championship, which was held in Talladega, Alabama back in January of 2017. So basically 7 years ago now. It's hard to believe. And that kind of got me into competition shooting. I'd always been vaguely aware of competition shooting, didn't know much about kind of how to get started or where to go. And so actually the thing we're going to talk about today is something I'm really passionate about because I was already a fairly experienced concealed carrier, shooter, instructor. I was part-time law enforcement reserve. And so, but even then with all that, I didn't know what I didn't know about competition shooting or even where to get started. So that competition, and which I just heard from a friend, he's like, "Hey, all you gotta do is go to this into this indoor range, and they're gonna have you shoot a qualifier, and depending on how you score on that, will determine if you move on to the next level." And I just kept moving to the next level, to the next level, and ended up being the winner of the regional championship, and that took me to the national championship where I finished 10th. And so that was kind of the catalyst to so many other things that followed. And I realized, number one, I was really passionate about wanting to get even better at shooting, and number two, that I realized, well, you mentioned it. We talked about on my podcast. There's an opportunity to share that with other people,
Mhm.
and to kind of help them discover the joys. That's really the thing. It's a joyful, happy, fun endeavor to participate in competition shooting. It's a wonderful community. There's a lot of opportunities there. And so that's kind of the story. So along with that, I got into three gun for a few years, and then I transitioned from that to where I strictly compete in USPSA right now. But I've thought about dipping my toe in IDPA, or even the tactical games possibly, or something. I don't know. But right now I'm pretty laser focused on USPSA. So I've managed to achieve a master class rating in USPSA. Still haven't quite got that grandmaster classification yet. Even though I know I'm capable of it, just gotta, keep putting in the work, and I gotta have more classifier opportunities to get to that I guess most elite levels. But even as a master class competitor, I've done quite well, finishing top 10 in area and state championships, winning the last two state championships I've participated in,
Okay.
and finishing as good as 15th at nationals just this last November in Florida at the IPSC National Championship in production division.
Okay.
So I've done quite well for myself. And other Riley biographical information. I'm certified in a lot of the typical disciplines you expect. NRA. I'm no longer active, but I did get a USCCA instructor as well as training counselor certification a number of years ago.
Mhm.
Um, I've also trained. Well, I got post certifications back from when I was law enforcement in both handgun and patrol rifle instructor. I've trained with a bunch of who's in the firearms, industry.
Yeah.
Rob Latham, Mike Seeklander, Scott Jedlinski, Tim Herron, Matt Little, a whole bunch of others, guys I really, love and respect, and many of them I consider friends and mentors now.
Mhm.
And yeah, I think that's pretty much it. Back to concealedcarry.com. That's my full-time day-to-day job. And within that, we're trying to be the number one resource online for concealed carry related information, education, and products. And then along with that, we acquired a number of brands or started up brands like Mountain Medical. I know you interviewed Brian from Mountain Medical. That's one of the brands we launched a few years ago.
Mhm.
Range Tech shot timers, barrel block, um, oh golly, KSG Army holsters. See, I can't even remember all the brands that we run now. So, uh, yeah, Ready Up Gear would be another one. So, yeah, it's me just pursuing, all these opportunities as they've kind of landed at my feet, and try not to say no, and
Right.
and then just grind, 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 grind.
Okay.
There you go. It's probably longer an intro, but when people ask for an intro, I'm like, man, I don't even know where to begin because there's a lot of different, I got a lot, I wear a lot of hats too. So, but as simply as I can, that's Riley Bowman in a nutshell.
All right. Yeah. We interviewed Clint earlier this week for our upcoming podcast to be aired Monday. But yeah, he started out many years ago. I was my mom was at a concert and and he went into and then no, that's a joke, and but yeah, he was a card, but yeah, that one will be posted coming up Monday. It's on National Train a Teacher Day, so
Oh yeah, yeah,
we're partnering with my business and Crystal with hers, and yeah, it's something that I became passionate about. So uh,
absolutely.
uh, anxious
Yeah, I've
for the
known Clint
start.
for years, and I really respect the heck out of what he does with National Train Teacher Day. I haven't been able to participate because seems like there's always, and I'll be honest, I didn't look at it this year. Probably still could, but the last several years, I'm like, oh no, I'm already booked for this or I'm already booked for that, and I need to do a better job of trying to look forward, on next year's calendar, and make sure that because I'd be all over that. I think that's a wonderful thing, and I'm glad you're participating in that.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll jump into our questions here. First question was, what are the different types of leagues or associations out there for people to get involved in um, with competition shooting?
Yeah. So, I touched on a couple of those, right, in my intro, I guess. So I'll start with USPSA, which actually is probably the longest running, certainly in practical shooting, is the longest running, most established practical shooting league, as you referred to, or it's a sport or an association.
Yeah.
So USPSA, I say it's the longest running. It originally started as IPSC, International Practical Shooting Confederation, or some people refer to it as IPSC. IPSC still is a thing. USPSA is really just the U.S. portion of IPSC. IPSC is an international organization. Jeff Cooper was hugely instrumental in starting IPSC. I mean, he was really the driving force behind that.
Hmm.
That was as a result of, they had been kind of experimenting with different shooting competitions and leagues and things in, Southern California, especially the Big Bear area, which is where Jeff Cooper was at the time, and a number of pretty well-known, names that you'd recognize too, like Eldon Carl and a number of other, kind of high-level shooting types that you would know from that era.
Hmm.
And so, they were doing these leather slap matches, right? And which was kind of cowboy action inspired, quick draw from the hip, just draw and fire one shot was really what they amounted to.
Yeah.
And that ran its course for about a decade or so and was very, very popular. But I think that, Cooper and others knew that, hey, there needs to be something more. And I think they realized they were onto something by doing something that, I mean, it did kind of start out a little bit as a game and as a sport, as something for fun, but they took it very seriously, and it became an opportunity to test equipment and gear and techniques and see, what works best and what doesn't. But clearly, there was a way to expound upon that. And so, in 1976, IPSC was founded, what they call the Columbia Conference in Missouri, in Columbia, Missouri. That's why it's the Columbia Conference. And that was organized by Cooper. They brought in a bunch of respected people from around the U.S. and throughout the world. And that's one of the cool forward-thinking things about IPSC is right from day one, they had representatives from Japan, the UK, South Africa, the South other countries in Southeast Asia, Mexico, Canada, uh, a bunch of different international countries were represented at the Columbia Conference, the founding of IPSC. And if you go back and look at the founding documents and the original meeting minutes, which you can still see today, some of that's recorded in history. I'm thankful to him for doing so. Carl Wren, if you're familiar with him of TR Training out of near kind of the Austin, Texas area, on his website, he's got a lot of those original documents uploaded and saved there. But they basically explain how this is out of an attempt to try to continue that work that they had started with the leather slap matches, which was to discover what techniques and what gear works best, like basically prove it. And, you can't very easily do a face off, head-to-head competition with live rounds, between people and see what works. That doesn't work very well. And they didn't really have simunitions back in the day. So the closest thing was to come up with competition.
Okay.
And so that's where it started,
Hmm.
and everything else kind of born out of that, at least in the practical shooting scene. And so IPSC, they later decided, oh, we got to break up the world into these, regions within the world, and the U.S. region is what's known as USPSA, or the United States Practical Shooting Association.
Okay.
And I think that was official in 1985. About not even quite 10 years later, a few folks decided that USPSA had become too sporty or too gamey.
Hmm.
So they decided to create IDPA, the
Okay.
International Defensive Pistol Association. And so IDPA was created and founded, very similar in a lot of respects to USPSA. It's very much a practical shooting sport, but the rules are such to try to make it a little less gamey and a little bit more defensive, scenario kind of oriented, uh, which there's some pluses and minuses to that approach, but obviously it's been a successful organization as it's still in effect today. Three Gun also came out of the early 80s, which was basically very IPSC or USPSA like, but hey, let's do the same thing, but now let's do rifle, shotgun, and pistol, all three, right?
Right.
Three guns more fun than one gun, right? That's kind of why I got into three gun when I first got into competition shooting, and it was fun, but I also found out it's very expensive,
Yeah.
which was not the only, but one kind of major driver for me to just focus on USPSA for the time being. Is I realized I could get more of my goals accomplished with while spending less money.
Okay.
So those are probably your three big ones, especially in practical shooting, is USPSA and IDPA, and then three gun. And while those other two are very well-defined organizations, three gun is not. There are more like regional or sometimes state or local organizations that run their own variety of three gun matches. We might refer to those as outlaw matches,
Mhm.
meaning they're simply not associated with any kind of organization, right? Not sanctioned by anybody. There's been a couple of attempts to try to create more of a national level multi-gun or three-gun organization, but all of those attempts thus far have, for the most part, failed, or at least failed. And not like some of them are still operating. They just haven't gotten the traction to really become widespread, right? So. Um, beyond that, you've got smaller and kind of more. Oh, I forgot Steel Challenge. I should have mentioned Steel Challenge. Steel Challenge also began in the early to mid 80s, uh, which is lumped into practical shooting. It's a lot less on the shooting and moving that we tend to see in the run and gun sports, the other three that I mentioned,
Mhm.
but is really about just raw, pure speed. It's like drag racing with a pistol or a PCC in your hand.
Oh,
Like what's the absolute fastest that I can push the limits of my abilities and the limits of my gun, my equipment to hit these five steel targets, as fast as possible. Um, and it's actually a great place to get started for a lot of people because the equipment requirements are actually pretty minimal compared to some of their sports. Like you don't have to have all the mag pouches, and you don't even really have to have much in the way of a belt unless because like, you could show up with a 22 rifle or a PCC or even with a 22 caliber pistol,
mhm.
and all those are done from a low ready.
Okay.
So you don't even have to have a holster at that point. So you can just show up with a gun and shoot a steel challenge match. Steel challenge was acquired by USPSA, I think around 2007 or 8 or thereabouts. So it's actually part of the USPSA organization now.
Okay.
So outside of that, you got a lot of smaller, more localized outlaw type things. You've got I mean, for instance, like some ranges will run like a bowling pin, shoot or something, or they'll just run some kind of their own variation of a USPSA or IDPA like shooting match.
Right.
And so you see quite a few of those around. And some clubs and some ranges will run a USPSA sanctioned one, an IDPA sanctioned one, and maybe even a steel challenge sanctioned match. And then they'll have one that's sometimes they'll just call it a tactical match or an outlaw match, and it'll be very similar to those other sports, but just not affiliated with any organization. So, as is typical, if you ask me a question, I'm going to give you a fairly detailed answer, but hopefully that covers the
Okay.
bases as far as different organizations that you can get involved with for competition shooting.
Okay. Second part of that question is some people I would imagine, and I've had some people whenever I talk about getting involved in competition shooting, well, don't I have to be an expert? No. To me, I tell them no, they don't. No, you just got to have basic marksmanship skills, and it's kind of something to help. So, what if somebody was going thinking about? Okay, well, you piqued my interest. I think I may want to try one of these three. Uh, what do I do since I've never stepped foot on a competition range? How do I get involved in something like that? What's the
Yeah.
process that they go through?
Yeah. Yeah. So you're exactly right. You don't have to be an expert. Very few people are what I would call experts that participate in these sports. By and large, most of them are certainly amateurs and do it just purely for fun. And that really is, I mean, uh, yeah, we're going to talk about the practical applications of, well, what do we get out of this competition that maybe helps us on the tactical or defensive side. And certainly you could take those things as seriously as you want to, but it's also just a lot of fun to participate. And so why shouldn't we have fun?
Right.
Um, and so, I mean, you don't have to be an expert and you shouldn't be an expert. I would say to get involved, you really just need to have some modicum of basic gun handling skills and safety. Like as long as you can be safe, then you should be able to participate and show up and participate in these. As far as how to get started, how to find them, um, a couple of a couple of options. One, you can certainly talk to your local ranges
Hmm.
and see if they host anything like that. And a lot of them do. Not all of them do, but a lot of them do. And you may find something that way. Like for instance, in my local area here, at least all of the big name ranges, in particular, I'm talking, and I'm including the indoor ones, run some kind of match at the range, and some run multiple. And so you can stop in and be like, hey, do you guys organize any competitions or shooting matches, and see what they've got. And if they don't, hopefully, they can point you to another range where they do. And if they don't do that, maybe that'll be an encouragement for them to go, maybe we should organize something like that. People are asking, because I think it's a great way for ranges to bring people in to
Right.
experience the range, to get familiar with the range. I became a member of a club because I was shooting matches at that club, and so it's a great way of getting people indoor.
Yeah.
Some ranges I think look at it as, well, we got to shut everything down for the night, and that's money we're not making. But then you have match fees and range fees that are part of the match fees. So it might not be as much revenue sometimes if you have like a really busy night for your indoor range, but a lot of times I think the payoffs come later on too, as you get more people through the door and buying product from you, buying ammo from you, buying a membership from
Right.
from you eventually. But that's one way, is to find and get involved in some of the matches. Probably the simplest way that you can do right now online is you can go to practicescore.com. That's practicecore.com. Practicescore.com. It's like practical and score mixed together.
Okay.
And that is the number one resource. That's the number one website that is used by match directors and people that run matches for scorekeeping of matches. Why? Because it's a great software, and I mean, it nobody has done it better. So, everybody uses it, which is convenient because it's a one-stop shop to find not every match, but about 95% of matches are probably on practice score, from at least my estimation. And so go on practicescore.com, and you can search by you click on matches, and you can pull up, you know, by area. You can see within your local area, or whatever. Like I've done that on the road. I travel a little bit and I go, I wonder if on Thursday evening while I'm in that particular city, if I can go hit that match. And I just get on practice score and search by that area. So, and you'll find USPSA and IDPA and multi-gun and still challenge matches and all kinds of matches on practice score. So that's the simple way.
Mhm.
Now, again, back to getting started and getting involved, you don't have to be an expert, but you do need to be safe. And a lot of them will require that you participate in some kind of intro class or a safety class, just so that they know that you're safe when you're going to shoot your first match.
Right.
And so when you're signing up for a match, not all the matches do as good a job with this, but a lot of times what I see is they'll have some information of, hey, if you're new to this,
Mhm.
we have a safety class that's held, for the 2 hours preceding the match start time, or we have a safety class on Tuesday night or Saturday, or whatever. They'll say that they have a safety class or an orientation class or an intro to competitive shooting class that they ask you to take. And so you want to look for that kind of information, and then of course attend that safety or orientation class to get started. And again, that's going to be dictated a little bit by the specific range or organization or club that's running the match as to the quality of that. But in my experience, I mean, they're there to help you succeed and have a good time in competition shooting. And so I think those are worthwhile classes to take. The ones I think that work the best is if they have it like, if they tell you match starts at, let's say it's a local indoor match and it starts at 7 p.m. or 6 p.m. They'll say, hey, if you can be here at 4 p.m., we have an orientation class. You basically spend about 2 hours getting orientated, going through safety rules, all that stuff, getting a feel for how things are done, and then they'll let you go right into shooting the match later that evening, where you're kind of handheld by the person teaching that orientation class. At
Yeah.
least that's the best way I've seen this done, and it works great. And so they're right there to kind of help you along the way, see how to get into it, see how to actually shoot the match and do it safely and understand the rules and all that stuff. So I'm all for making getting into competition matches less intimidating, because whether you want to admit it or not, I mean, I'll admit it now, but back when I was, just a reserve cop and an instructor, like, I thought it would be cool to shoot matches, but I was a little bit intimidated because I didn't know a whole lot of stuff,
Right.
didn't know where to get started. So that kept me from getting involved, and I wish I'd gotten involved sooner, because I consider this to be a blessing in my life,
Mhm.
and wish I had had that blessing sooner in my life.
Yeah. Most people, or most of the ranges, if I remember right, you they have guests that can come and even just observe if I
Oh yeah.
remember. So, if somebody says I'm interested, but I don't know if I how far I want to jump in just yet, let maybe I need to go see a match ran, and then most of the clubs, if I remember from my involvement in the past, they allow the
Hmm.
guests to come and just kind of observe
Yeah.
and enjoy the.
I I haven't seen a single match that didn't allow that.
Okay.
I'm not saying it doesn't exist out there somewhere, but if that's true, then I think they're in the wrong because that's, you absolutely should, you should want people to be able to come and observe. Uh, if anything, just to observe. Like, why not? Like, why wouldn't we want more people to enjoy this with us, even if they're not
Right.
participating in shooting? Like, practical shooting sports are awesome and they're fun. I think they're fun
Yeah.
to watch. So. But yeah, that is almost always totally doable and usually for no cost either, right? That's another thing. People might be like, I mean, I'll give you an example. If you wanted to show up and observe the IDPA National Championship or any of the USPSA National Championships this coming year, just show up to the range.
Mhm.
Nobody's going to charge you walking in. Nobody's going to care. As long as you got eye and ear pro and you stay, back away from, where the shooting's happening. Like you don't have to be like you just make sure you stay where it's safe.
Mhm.
Nobody's going to even ask who you are or what you're doing there. Like you're
Yeah.
just there hanging out and observing and having a good time watching the match. So no, not even a cost associated with watching the highest level matches that exist in the game. So absolutely. And I have encouraged others to do that. Hey, why don't you? In fact, that's how I got somebody locally here involved a while back. I said, hey, why don't you just come and watch this match? It's, Monday night at such and such time on this indoor range and come check it out. And they're like, oh, okay, sure. And then of course they're like, ah, it was great. Let's do it. So the next time they show up and they sign up and they participate.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm a member of, but David and I were a member of a local gun club, and we have a defensive pistol shoot. It's not a sanctioned. It's just
Hmm.
our own club, and we run it. And back over Thanksgiving weekend, I had decided to turn things up a little bit. I decided to run a low light defensive shoot at our club in our defensive area, and turned out to be a lot of people enjoyed it and want to have more of those. Which I don't. I know the IDP, those associations, those are pretty much, if they're at an outdoor range, they're held during the daytime, during light and everything. But I thought just said most of your defensive shooting, well, not most, but you can have defensive shootings in low light. Are people
Hmm.
really accustomed? Do they know how to handle a gun in low light?
Hmm.
And we went over a little safety briefing and stuff before the shoot, but yeah, people enjoyed it, and I think it's something that uh, I would like to see more clubs, kind of running, maybe some little lower light or less light
Oh yeah.
options. So, but
I'm aware of several matches and several clubs that run a low light match at least once per year, and
okay,
they're always a hit. And I can tell you too that in recent memory, several IDP national championships have had whole stages that were done in low light,
oh wow,
and the match is taking place during the daytime. So they either have a structure available to them to do that, or they build a structure, or something to make that possible. I think just this last one, or at least I know for sure, at least the last one or two IDP national championships have had low light stages
oh
as
wow.
part of the national championship. So yeah, absolutely. I think it's why not? If you could do low light work as part of a match setting, yeah, sounds like a good time to me.
All right. You want to ask your question?
So, Riley, with all the different leagues and associations out there, what are some of the differences and strengths and weaknesses of them for people that are getting involved in them?
Yeah. Let me address this first by saying what is the major strength of participating in or running a sanctioned match? Because I think that's a good place to start. And so by that, I mean like a USPSA match or an IDPA match or a still challenge match, which are part of well-defined, fairly large organizations. Why do that as opposed to just doing your own thing and running pure outlaw matches or a tactical or defensive match. And the reason why to do something that's associated with an organization is because of the structure that it provides. And it goes way beyond just rules and rule sets and specific targets that you use and things like that. It goes way beyond that. What I would say, and this is actually what got me into USPSA, is because I started realizing that something was sort of missing for me when I was competing in three gun, because all the three gun I did out, especially out here in the West, is woefully disorganized. Uh, Primarily down in like the southeast portion of the country. I think it's kind of died off now, but for a good stretch there was a multi-gun organization called Three Gun Nation. They even televised matches and stuff, and it was a whole big deal. And they were trying to make that organization go, big and nationwide. And I really wish it could have succeeded, but in the end, it did not. Um, but out here in the West, almost every, our state championship we had here, a couple other major matches I participated in three gun. What I realized was lacking for me was I would get done with a match and I'd be like, well, I finished fifth or fourth. I think my best finish at a big three gun match was fourth place in my division. I felt really good about because I beat a lot of good guys that day, but there were still some others I didn't beat. What I didn't know though was I didn't really truly knew how I stacked up against other certain competitors because they didn't happen to make it to that particular one. And so organization provides things like a classification system, which is what USPSA, IDPA, and Steel Challenge all have. And so what that does is it allows you to very quickly know and understand where people are at skill wise. And that might not be important to everybody, but it was important to me. But what it allows you to do is, I mean, it's kind of like, if you're familiar with golf or racing, there are other competitions and sports that people participate in where it's not just about the overall winner, but you also have like different classes of winners, right? And so you have like people of like skill competing against each other. And, so number one, you get to kind of see how you stack up in your respective class. And then number two, you're always hoping that maybe you can move up to the next class, right? And that was appealing to me because that I wanted to grow, and one way of measuring growth was if I was moving up in, say, classifications, as well as how I was doing in those, respective classifications. And so, organization provides that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it also makes it so that things are as close to apples as possible, meaning that you can go to a match in Georgia, you can go to a match in Colorado. And while individual stages that are set up for the match might be, whatever, very different, but each of those matches could run on the same weekend, the exact same USPSA classifier. And that'll be set up very precisely to specific measurements and target placements and wall positions and barricades or whatever, and fault lines, so that the way I shoot it in Colorado is exactly the way you'd shoot it in Georgia. And so now I can also see, wow, in the overall scheme of all, not just in my local area, but I get to see how I compare on a national level by the fact that we all shoot the same classifications a number of times each year. So, and that's, like I said, that's also true at IDPA. So that's, I think, one of the big strengths that an organization or competition league like these that we're talking about brings to the table is because you can actually do that because you have the organization, you have the structure, and you can collect data such as individual shooters classifications, and that allows you, when you show up to maybe a state match or a regional match or a national level match, you can now also compare yourself to other people of a like skill level. And I think that has I think there's a lot of benefits to that. Because one of the big things I think that drives people away from competition, especially when they show up the first time, and this is true of me. This is true of a lot of people I've seen. I've seen this happen multiple times. Let's just take, some SWAT cop. He thinks he's hot stuff because, I mean, he probably is. He's worked really hard to become this, SWAT officer and does very important work in his line of work and has gotten very skilled with a handgun and a rifle and is physically fit and all these things, right? shows up to his first USPSA match. And in that match, you've got, some D class shooters, C class shooters, B, A class, maybe a handful of master class. Maybe if you're lucky, there's one or two GMs, grandmasters at that match. And, hey, I'm this big bad SWAT cop. Let's go, let's go see what I can do at this local match. And they walk away a few hours later, like three from the bottom, you know, like getting trounced by all these other like dentists and doctors and IT techs and like people that aren't that you wouldn't expect to be highly skilled with a pistol or whatever in their hands. And so then that's a huge hit to the ego, and you're like, oh man, I don't want to do that again. I think there's something to be said that if you have shooters that show up and they're just constantly getting beat by these high level shooters, that's not a lot of fun. But if you have like different classifications, and then you can kind of look a little bit more of how am I doing against people of like skill,
Yeah.
maybe keeps it from being quite so intimidating and disheartening at the same time. So that would be some major strengths. Talk about the individual ones. USPSA's strength is that it's the largest, best well-organized of these primary practical shooting sports organizations. And so like that's definitely a strength, right? And it's been doing it for a long time. Its strength also in terms of the type of shooting sport that it is it's really, it's like Formula One racing. Because I mean, the race, it lasts for a period of time. Like you have multiple stages, you got to get through all those stages. You're taking, scores from each individual stage, and then you can take everything and compile it and make an overall score. So you don't just win the whole match based on a single stage, but multiple stages. You got to do well on everything. It's pretty comprehensive, but it's all about shooting efficiency. That's what USPSA is all about. The whole sport is purely based off of shooting efficiency. How efficiently can you place rounds on certain targets? And efficiency implies, hey, the sooner or faster I can do the thing, better, right? But if that's at the cost of poor accuracy, well, that's not that efficient. So
Right.
we're looking for this sweet spot of I need to hit good hits and also do it in as little time as possible. And that's a measure of efficiency that in USPSA is referred to as hit factor or points per second scored. In IDPA, for instance, it's a little bit different. It's still a measurement of efficiency to a degree, but it's not quite as perfectly calculated. In IDPA, it's still a time. Actually, the final score is a time score instead of a factor of points divided by time, which is how it's calculated in USPSA. In IDPA, you just take your time that you shot a stage in, and then if you have certain hits outside of certain target areas, then you add on seconds or whatever to as penalties to that, right?
Yeah.
And so that works okay too. But I think there's also some areas where that could probably be improved from a scoring side of things. But one of the strengths of that type of scoring is it's also very simple because people understand the idea of, well, this is the time I got that done in, and now I add on my penalties for the poor hits that I got. So there's pluses and minuses there. USPSA again is about, people think of it as like raw speed, and it is, but you also got to get good hits because nobody wins matches with misses and penalties all over the place. That just doesn't happen. IDPA is that, but maybe not quite as Formula One ish. It's I don't know what the good analog for that would be, but the rules are such that it's intended to be a little more defensive oriented. So you have certain scenarios, and you got to abide by those scenarios. As far as in this situation, you're starting in as if you were sleeping in your bed, and you got to wake up and do this and do that, and you got to kind of follow these procedures, if you will. Whereas in USPSA, it's more like, here's your start position, there's all the targets, there's the stage. When you hear the beep, you shoot all the things in the most efficient way possible. Like, we're not going to tell you which order to shoot them in. Doesn't matter. Just go shoot them. However you think is best. But in IDPA, you also have things like, well, I got to engage things in order of tactical priorities. So closer targets need to be shot before farther targets because they represent a more immediate threat. and I got to use cover, right? And so if this target presents itself first as they come around a corner, well, that's the one that's got to get shot first, right? So those things make sense, and that's what appeals to some people is they like that it helps reinforce some of those tactical priorities a little bit more. But here's the problem with doing that, and this has always been my big gripe with those that say that IDPA is like, well, it's a defensive, shooting sport, and it helps me prepare for defensive stuff. Yes, however, it still gets gamified because as soon as you apply rules to something, and as soon as you put a timer into the mix, especially, people, what do they want to do? They want to be the fastest one. They want to win.
Yeah.
And if there's incentive like that, then it's going to get gamified, guaranteed.
Mhm.
And so that's where you see, like what's a common, like a well-known rule in IDPA that people, many people are familiar with is, well, you either got to do a tactical reload, meaning if I'm reloading in the middle of a magazine, I got to retain the partially full magazine, and, and then load the next full one, but I can't drop that partial one to the ground, right? Or I got to shoot to a slide lock, and then it doesn't matter if I drop the mag to the ground, I can just do the reload, right?
Right.
That's a pretty famous, part of the rule set where it differs greatly from USPSA, because for USPSA I can just reload whenever I want, doesn't matter, right? And so, but here's where that gets gamified, right? So let's say you have a target array of 4 targets, so you're in a position and you're shooting these 4 targets. Well, and each one of them needs 2 hits based on the rules. So, okay, target 1, 2 hits, target 2, 2 hits, target 3, 2 hits, target 4, 2 hits. But then I have some amount of movement and I still have 2 rounds left in my gun. And I go, you know what? I could try to, while on the move, retain that partial mag and do a tactical reload, or I could just move a lot more efficiently if I could simply dump that mag and put a fresh one in.
Mhm.
Well, to do that, hey, I just dump my last remaining rounds in that last target, in that target array, right? That's not true to real world, let's say, like you're throwing extra rounds at something that supposedly doesn't need those extra rounds, but you're doing it because it's a game.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I mentioned that you asked about differences, strengths, and weaknesses, David. I'm just giving examples of these. They're all shooting sports, and there's pluses and minuses, and some people saw USPSA as being too much of a game, so they're like, well, let's create this defensive oriented one, and it's good in a lot of respects, but there's still ways that it gets turned into the thing they're trying to avoid. And so take that or leave it. Like some people find that IDPA is a better flavor for them.
Mhm.
I like USPSA because I wanted to be purely focused on learning how to shoot like with maximum efficiency.
Mhm.
And I saw certain rules in IDPA that you had to abide by that I didn't, that definitely break the rule of being efficient. But then I had to look at them like, yeah, but I also don't agree with that as being a tactically relevant thing in the real world either.
Mhm.
So an example that is honestly, guys, if I had 2 rounds left in my gun, and somehow I know that, I'm just gonna dump that mag on the ground and put a fresh one in. Like that's my tactical application in the real world for me. I know some people would, like, oh my gosh, you'd give up 2 rounds. It's on the ground now. Guess what? If expediency calls for it, I it, guess what? I'll trade 17 for 2 or whatever all day long, especially if there's a high probability that I don't even need close to 17 more rounds. So, um, anyway, neither here nor there. Still challenge, strength, weakness. Strength is easy to get started into, relatively low cost compared to some of the other sports. Um, Whereas some of them, like USPSA, can be a little bit more expensive to get started in. It doesn't have to be, but it certainly is compared to something like, say, Steel Challenge. Out of all of them that we talked about, 3 gun is the most expensive thing to get involved in. And like that makes sense. You got to buy 3 guns if you don't have them already. You got to buy 3 different types of ammo, actually more than that, because you usually have stages that have birdshot and also sometimes slugs, sometimes even buckshot. So yeah, you're both buying like 5 different types of ammo and 3 guns and all the equipment that goes with that. So um, you need to, decide which sport appeals to you the most and helps you accomplish your goals the most. So people will look at 3 gun and they go, that just looks like a lot of fun, and I'm just here to have fun. Cool, awesome. Or some people want to get more work with their rifle and their pistol. Well, 3 gun is the place for you. It's just going to come at a cost. Some people want to get work on rifle, but they don't necessarily do 3 gun because of other reasons, including cost. Well, guess what? The nice thing is you can compete in IDPA, USPSA, and Steel Challenge with a PCC, and you can compete in Steel Challenge with a 22 long rifle or pistol. So that's another reason why Steel Challenge is such a good one to get started in from a cost perspective, especially not just the guns, but also the ammo, because everyone knows you can buy a lot more 22 than you can the other stuff. So anyway, there's probably a lot more I could go down further into that rabbit hole, but to sum it all up, they all have different strengths and weaknesses. They have different flavors. My big one is I like choosing to compete in a sport that is sanctioned by an organization, because with that comes consistency in rules, consistency in application, and the ability to see kind of how I stack up in a broader data set, rather than just comparing myself to my 3 best friends that I shoot with locally all the time anyway.
Okay. All right. Well, next question would be, how much, if any, does competition shooting help you train for potential self-defense events? And then also, are there any negatives that could lead to training scars in those said?
Yeah, I can go real deep on this too, but I think this is actually one of the questions I can answer most simplistically, and here's how I'll answer it. Here's how competition shooting helps you train for a potential defensive event. It helps you because competition shooting, more than anything else I've seen, helps people in 2 big ways. One, learn how to shoot at a truly like high skill level.
Mhm.
Okay. Because you won't be competitive unless you truly learn manipulations, shooting fundamentals, all that. Like, you've got to have that down pat if you're going to be even remotely competitive. And I'm not saying that to like try to scare anybody away. Here's the cool thing. Most of the time, if you enjoy competing and you start doing it, you're like, hey, this is fun. I want to get better. All of a sudden, you're encouraged to practice a little bit more. And next thing you know, you're getting better. So like, competition shooting just helps people become better shooters, period. And I think that's a great thing. And guess what? Does that help you in a self-defense event to be a better shooter? 100%. Like, ain't nobody I know that's been in a gunfight before say they wish they had less shooting skill, than more, right? So like, having more skill is always a good thing. Um, so that's the first big thing. The second big thing is that shooting competition helps you also start to incorporate sort of, I guess, multitasking would be one way of explaining it, along with a shooting application. By that, I mean, there's a lot going on. If it's a USPSA or an IDP stage, especially, first of all, you've got numerous different positions you got to, navigate your way to. You've got different, obstacles in the way, walls, barrels, no shoots, friendly targets, etc. You got all these things going on that you got to be aware of and understanding. You got to know where you're at with things. You got to know where it's safe to point your gun and not point the gun.
Right.
Your gun handling's got to be on point. If you have a malfunction somewhere along the way, like, you're still thinking, but I got to get over here and shoot this target, or I'm in the middle of shooting these 3 targets and now have a malfunction. And so you're being asked to do all of this multitasking, which equates to thinking
Right.
while you're shooting and running a gun. That translates very well to helping people manage stress in a self-defense event. And it can be a controversial thing to discuss, because they'll be like, that's different. It's different than real world. And like, real world stress is different stress. It's pretty eye-opening when some of your good friends like mine, one of my best friends is Matt Little of Graybeard Actual. If you don't know who Matt is, he retired from Chicago PD. At the time he left, he was their training coordinator for their entire SWAT team. So this is like one of the largest and busiest SWAT teams in the country, if not in the world.
Mhm.
And he was a part of that elite unit, right? Simultaneously of running that career, he was also in the Army National Guard in one of their special forces groups. National Guard, there's 2 of them. I think he was in 20th group, which came along with fairly regular and frequent 6-month deployments or less overseas to the Middle East, or the bulk of the global war on terror. Matt also happened to retire from the U.S. Army, from Special Forces. Okay, so the dude's seen it on the tactical side in both military and law enforcement. Becomes a civilian, of course, when he retires. Starts teaching classes. Becomes passionate about concealed carry stuff. But he's also a USPSA and IDPA master class competitor. So he kind of sees this whole picture, right? Because he's experienced a lot of things that not like he's the whole package. In other words, it blew my mind when I heard these words come out of Matt's mouth one day. He said, you know, stepping up to the starting position of a USPSA stage is more stressful for me than being in actual combat.
Wow.
And I was like, what? Like, well, he's like, to be fair, when you've been in combat for basically the last 20 years, on both the streets of Chicago as well as Iraq and Afghanistan, he's like, that kind of becomes the norm. This thing here that I got into, competitive shooting, is kind of scary to me. I was like, man, that is quite the perspective.
Right.
But I've also heard out of Matt's mouth, and I also throw another name to you, Bill Blowers, another friend of mine, runs a company called Tap Rack Tactical, and he's a retired SWAT cop out of Washington State, kind of the Seattle, Tacoma, up in that area. Bill Blowers actually just said the other day in a Facebook comment something to the effect of how he's not super passionate about competing himself, but he's done a little bit of it, and he's also sought training with competition shooters, because what he witnessed on their SWAT team is that their ability to perform in a tactical environment improved as they took what they could learn in terms of performance shooting from that a lot of times is what's learned in competition shooting, right?
Okay.
And so some pretty interesting perspectives there. And those two guys are not the only ones that share that perspective, not even close. Then you realize, and a lot of them won't talk about it, either, whether it's an NDA type thing or just out of respect for the men and women in uniform. But a lot of your top guys, Rob Latham, Jerry Barnhart from back in the day, and I think he still is on contract teaching for Department of Defense. Brian Nelson is doing some instructing. He's a world champion for the U.S. Marine Corps. I mean, Delta, Special Forces groups, Navy SEALs, all the different, like all these guys have at some point hired competition shooters to come teach them how to shoot better. So that's how I answer that question. Does competition shooting help you train for potential self-defense event? Yes, because it helps you actually learn how to shoot really, really well, which makes all the tactical stuff easier. Because guess what? I don't have to do with my gun in my hand. I don't have to think about it. It's just an extension of me. When I decide that I got to put 2 rounds or 3 rounds or 10 rounds in this whatever target, like it's as if I just think it and it happens, because it's an extension of me. Like that's where, for me, in my pursuit of competition shooting, that's where I wanted to get to, was make the gun become like an extension of me. But I didn't have to think about the shooting application. Now I'm focused on the tactical, solving the tactical problem. And that's the same thing I've heard echoed by all these other high-level tactical dudes. The negatives. There's potential negatives. I think that most of those are mitigated, though, when we understand contextually what we're doing.
Okay.
I think we set ourselves up for potential training scars when we think, or we fool ourselves into thinking what we're doing in a training environment, in a competition environment, translates perfectly over into that defense world, into self-defense world. I think we need to keep things in their appropriate silos, if you will. So competition shooting primarily helps me get really good at manipulating and shooting my gun without thinking about it. Like, get it to a subconscious level of shooting a gun. Does it teach me tactical stuff? No, it doesn't. So where do I need to get my tactical training and application from? From tactically specific, training. Okay. It's two different things. Not that they have to be two different worlds entirely. There's crossover for sure. It's just that, where do I learn shooting? I learn shooting from shooting and from competition. Where do I learn tactics? From something that's focused on teaching and training tactics. That's why I'm a little bit cautious about, the whole idea of using IDPA as a self-defense kind of oriented training mechanism. I would be careful not to think that, because there's still things about it that is a game, and I wouldn't just treat it as a competition shooting sport. Learn how to get good at it. Learn how to get good at shooting your gun, and then go take your appropriate, like, whatever it is, because some of us are cops, or some of us are military, or some of us are just civilians looking to get quality training. Take the courses that are going to teach you all the tactics oriented stuff. Like, that's its own thing. So just make sure you keep those, like, you got to keep your goals in line with the training you're actually taking, and not mislead yourself into thinking that this thing over here trains this thing over there. No, no, it's a oh, what's the word? A Venn diagram. Tactics are over here, shooting's over here. There's other stuff in the mix too. Is there overlap? Yes.
Yeah.
But where am I going to do best learning this stuff from those that focus on that exact thing? And where am I going to do best at learning this? Over here. Okay. And just understand where they overlap and understand what the context is, so that you apply yourself accordingly.
Okay. All right.
I've been going for a minute, but can I just give one quick example?
Yeah.
Because I think examples are good. I actually just had this conversation yesterday. So it just popped into my head. Somebody was saying how back in the day they took a bunch of training at Mid-South, which is I think they're still in operation. It's a pretty well-known training academy that's trained a lot of high-level military dudes. And this course they took was like 5 days. It was with competition shooters, so learning how to shoot really good. And what he remembered was that, over those 5 days, he was taught to, hey, when I'm drawing my gun, I'm going to start prepping my trigger as I'm starting to, as I'm kind of presenting the gun to the target, because that's a little bit more efficient, right? So this is a great example of, I expressed my interest in being more efficient as a shooter, but I also have to remember that there's important context that I got to fit things, in the appropriate boxes here. So this is a really interesting example. He said that he spent so many reps that week learning to draw and prep the trigger and then fire a shot, that he found it difficult to train himself out of doing that. And he was concerned that on the job, he would have a situation where it was warranted to draw his gun, and that he would accidentally go ahead and fire a shot because he was, he had sort of built in this muscle memory, so to speak, of prepping that trigger. And I was like, well, I can see that as being a valid concern. However, I see that as being the onus is on you to understand and start applying, certain contexts. Because even me, as a now primarily in terms of my pursuit of skill, competition focused shooter, I understand there's a time to draw a gun and fire, and there's a time to draw and not fire. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And in my dry practice, you know what I do? There's times I do dry fire and I draw and I go to the target and I press the trigger immediately.
Mm-hmm.
There are times I simply just draw. There are times just draw and go to low ready. Okay. So, like, the onus is on us, and probably on us as well as instructors, to make sure we're also communicating, like, hey, in this class, we're focusing on this thing here, but it's a limited, it's only a small piece of the pie. You need to understand, students, that you also need to be practicing these other things. And so you can say that, well, this gave me a training scar. Okay, yeah, that may be true. However, like, you got to understand what your personal context is. Me, as a performance shooting focused instructor, I don't always know exactly what my individual students' contexts are.
Right.
But you're a law enforcement officer. Think about how you do your job on a day-to-day, basis. Have you ever shot anybody on the job? Well, no, not yet. Have you ever drawn your gun on the job? Yes, I have. Okay. Think about how that went down. Play out those scenarios in your mind. Incorporate that into your dry practice. Okay. Don't always do dry fire where you draw and press the trigger.
Right.
Simple as that. So,
okay.
Training scars.
All right. Most experienced shooters at these events are most likely willing to help you instead of make you feel inadequate, aren't they? Or that's at least my experience in the IDPA arena whenever I shot a little bit of that. It's a great group of people, and I don't know. I think some people have the well, I don't want to go and embarrass myself or feel put down or anything. And just kind of piggyback off of that, see what your thoughts are as far as the willingness of the other shooters to help out. I've heard many
Yeah.
stories.
I agree. I think that by and large, the competition shooting communities are incredibly welcoming and helpful and friendly. Are there exceptions? Of course there are. You know, and are there jerks out there? Yeah. I mean, that's true of pretty much anything you do. But more than about anything I've done, the competition shooting communities are just incredibly welcoming and helpful. So the very first 3-gun match I showed up to, they didn't require an orientation class. I'm like, hey, here's a match. I'm going to sign up. I didn't know what I was getting myself into. I did know that I was going to probably be lacking in some respects. And so I show up to that match. And fortunately, and I can't remember if it was advice of a friend or if I just, if the thought just occurred to me, but I just remember thinking, I'm going to see if I can find the match director. I made sure I got there plenty early before the match actually began.
Mm-hmm.
And then I just started asking around, hey, who's the match director? Oh, that's Mike. He's over there. So I found Mike and I go over and talk to Mike. And I'm like, hey, Mike, first time here, never done this before. Not that I'm a total idiot. Like, at that time I had, law enforcement experience. I was a post instructor already in handgun and rifle. I kind of expressed that to him. Like, I generally know how to handle a gun, but this is definitely my first competition, my first rodeo. So anything I should know? He's like, hey man, just be safe. Don't do anything crazy. Just have a good time. Be safe. And I'm like, and then at that point, I'm like, hey, thanks, appreciate it. Now, some people might have viewed that as not being super helpful because they might have wanted a little bit more hand holding. But I took that advice to heart and was like, okay, I'm just going to be safe and I'm going to have a good time, you know? And so, I didn't try to like get too crazy with anything or push myself, beyond my limits and go too fast. I just, made sure I was aware of muzzle direction, trigger finger discipline, all that, and shot the targets and had a fun time. But as I was talking to him, I did have the question. I said, "Hey, so I've got a belt here, I've got a holster, I've got pouches for rifle and pistol mags, but I know that you guys do some reloading of a shotgun on the fly, but I have nothing for that." He's like, "No problem, I got you." He goes in his pickup truck, pulls out of a bag I think it was a 10-round shot shell carrier, and he clipped 10 shot shells into this thing, and he's like, "Here you go. You can use it for today, and just give it back to me when you're done." Awesome. Put that on my belt. Get my shot shells in place. Had never practiced reloading, shotgun before like that, especially in the way they do it in competition. And but just super helpful, super friendly, like willing to hand off gear. Most of us, or I should say many of us, travel to matches like here's my competition belt. This is my main one. I have 2 or 3 of these that I sometimes, it depends on if I'm flying or driving to a match. I, if I'm driving, I almost always have spare gear with me.
Yeah.
And why do I do that? Well, because I saw somebody else do it. I was like, oh, it's sort of like this development of culture within the community. You
Mhm.
see other people help people out like that. And you're like, good idea. I wasn't, I'm so focused on myself, but now, hey, community, right? And so next thing you know, my old belt, because I decided I like something else better. I'll take the old belt, have it handy, lend it to the next person that might need it.
Okay.
Whole extra spare holsters, belts, pouches, mags. I had an incident last year where, due to an unfortunate car fire I experienced while traveling, um, I didn't have any of my ammo, and I was expected to shoot a match the next day. A friend in the community was like, "Hey, bro, I got you." Showed up that next morning. He's like, "Here's 500 rounds." So, yes, incredibly helpful, welcoming community. Are there exceptions? Yes, but they're the exception, not the rule.
Okay. All right. Crystal, you had some questions for him?
No, because you pretty much touched base. The one that I just was curious about was how do you transition from competition shooting to real life scenarios where your life is on the line, but you pretty much went over that with the examples you gave.
Yeah. So, and I'll just say this too, and this is just speaking for me and not necessarily anybody else. I certainly know competition shooters that, while they also believe in the Second Amendment and they probably have a concealed carry permit, and they may very well carry, concealed or otherwise throughout their day-to-day lives. that's more of a casual thing for them. Whereas I'm very serious about concealed carry and the practice of that. And so I can't speak to what anybody else really does or how they approach it. But I know that there's a spectrum there. So, but most of the, even for as involved as I am in competition shooting nowadays, people probably think that I do a whole bunch of dry fire from, using my competition setup and using my competition gun and all of that. Actually, most of my dry fire is done from concealment with the same holster and the same gun that I carry for self-defense on a day-to-day basis. And so that's one of my approaches, Crystal, is that most of my actual practice, especially in a dry fire environment, is more oriented to the self-defense side of things. And then, over the years, I've taken a lot of different training classes. And like I was saying a minute ago, like you want to make sure you keep things in their, appropriate respective buckets. But I have taken a few more competition focused classes in the last couple of years. But over time, I've had a pretty good mix of where it's like, hey, this is a really interesting class that's a little bit more performance shooting or competition focused. Let's go take that and let's learn how to get better at competition or get better at just shooting, period. But then it's like, hey, look, here's this class with Dave Spalding. Dave Spalding's well respected, handgun combatives for, he's retired now, but I've taken 2 classes with Dave Spalding. They're very defensive, tactics focused or oriented classes. So, yeah, just think about what your personal goals and needs are, and then just do what you got to do to just make sure you're being honest with yourself as far as what it is you're actually accomplishing and what you're working towards, and don't kind of mix those. Don't mix. Like I said, don't go take a competition class and think you're preparing yourself for tactics
Right.
in some.
Yeah. All right. You got anything else, David?
I think I'm good.
How about you, Crystal? Anything else?
I'm
pop
good.
into your
Yeah,
head?
it's been great. Yeah.
All
Can,
right.
can I touch on one thing there, Crystal? I think that
Yeah.
you had a question here that you'd sent me that said, are there specific skills or strategies from competitive shooting you find particularly useful in self-defense and vice versa? This
Oh,
is
yeah.
something that I think I'm uniquely qualified to answer because I've spent a lot of time working on this. But and it's actually become a core component of my curriculum that I teach. My class that I teach now, the primary one that I go on the road and teach, it's called Pistol Intelligence, and it's a shooting class, a performance shooting class. It's intended to teach people how to shoot their gun at a high level, or how to get to that high level, hopefully eventually, right? By teaching them these various skills in that curriculum. One of the big things that competition shooting and performance shooting has helped me, and I think helps other people learn how to do, is how to actually um, it's how to process visually information at a much higher rate or speed, because you have so much going on. Like when you're pushing the envelope of performance of what you can do with a gun in your hand with respect to, I mean, like I'm always looking at a stage and trying to break down, like, how can I see and how can I shoot that target just a little bit sooner and a little bit faster than the other guy, right? When you're looking at it from that perspective, it's what you start realizing, especially the more you do it, is yeah, there's some movement stuff involved. There's some physical, technical things that are involved that are a part of that. But at the end of the day, a lot of it starts coming back to what you're actually seeing and what you're actually doing with your eyes. And I never took a defensive shooting oriented course that really did much with that vision related, visual processing type stuff. But it's something that gets talked about quite a bit in competitive circles because again, we're pushing this envelope of performance. And so that's kind of one of the driving factors behind me um, writing the pistol intelligence curriculum, was to start I had this desire to share with the defensive oriented communities um, some of these lessons we can learn from competition shooting, especially on the vision side. And so I really did a deep dive, and still am learning all the time. And I've got books and all kinds of studies and research articles and things that I've gone through and that I continue to go through, because I'm trying to stay up to speed on the science of it all the time. Just trying to understand how our eyes work and how that uh, translates into what we do, especially in a self-defense event. And there's some really interesting stuff out there, you know. So a couple things just to kind of scratch the surface and sort of like, here's the tip of the iceberg, because there's a lot there that you can. I mean, we can do a whole podcast out, you know, hour or two just talking about this one thing. But just give you one example of a study that Force Science Institute did together with some law enforcement out of the UK. And they took basically their rookie cops, and they took their, like, you know, kind of their SWAT team level, you know, guys, and they were trying to see what was different in terms of performance in these different force on force scenarios between, you know, again, guys and gals just out of the academy, and then guys and gals have been doing it for a long time and are well, you know, have a high skill set. And one of the big takeaways was what they did with their eyes, what they actually looked at, and what they were actually seeing and processing. And the one thing that you can tell, that you know for sure from that study, and there's other takeaways, but one big defining thing was that the experienced cops tended to be and remain target focused throughout the duration of the event. The rookies, on the other hand, were target focused until their gun came up into view, and then they started trying to find their sights. Now, that's a good thing that they were trying to find their sights, but the problem was, is it caused them to have other failure points, which included not seeing that what they thought was a threat ended up not actually being a threat. And so they had mistake of fact shootings. Whereas the experienced guys stayed target focused, and even when they were shooting, were target focused. And guess what? I didn't used to know that this was possible, and I wouldn't have learned it except in competition shooting. But I shoot iron sights target focused now. That doesn't mean I don't see my sights or don't use them, but they're there in my view, and I'm aware of them, and I'm aligning them and doing all that, but they're blurry. But you got to learn some, you know, tips and tricks of how to be able to shoot target focused even with iron sights.
Right.
And so that's just a couple kind of, again, scratching the surface, and just there's a lot of things I dive into in my curriculum to teach people how to see better, because the better you can see, the better you can shoot.
Oh yeah.
And also, the other thing that it translates into is the better you see, the better decisions you make.
Right.
And that's probably the more relevant thing in the self-defense side.
Yeah. All right. Well, if anybody wanted to get in touch with you, questions for competition shooting or some of your training, how would they get in touch with you? And you know, where could they find you?
Yeah. So the quickest, easiest thing is go to RileyBowman.com, RILEYBOWMAN.com. That's my personal website, but it has links to everything else. You know, so there's a contact form there if you want to reach out to me and get in touch with me. So please feel free. You can also see my training calendar there if you want to, you know, check me out, come train with me. And also concealedcarry.com is just kind of the home place for all things business related, and pretty much, you know, from there it goes out into the other brands and businesses that we operate as well. So that's two options. But if you directly want to get with me, RileyBowman.com. Hope to see you there.
All right. Sounds good. Final question for you. You've had a little bit of time to ponder it. What's your favorite activity, or what do you do to de-stress from the daily routines?
Yeah. I love reading and studying. So yeah, if I want to stress, I've got a whole big library of books, and very few of them are for pleasure reading. It's I've become so passionate about trying to expand my own knowledge, understanding on some of the topics that I'm passionate about. So yeah, read a book. I listen to a lot of audiobooks. Those are quite distressing for me. I enjoy consuming books via audio, but I also enjoy reading as well. It's rare I pick up a paper book, but it's not uncommon to see me with my iPad in my lap with a an ebook, I guess, on the screen. So
Okay. All right.
that's what I do.
All right. Well, that sounds good. Well, I appreciate your time today, Riley, and thank you for being a guest and talking to us about the competition shooting arena. And look forward to maybe having you back on for future topics or diving into some of the topics that we discussed here a little bit later, if you don't mind. So we thank
Absolutely.
you. We thank you, and we hope you have a wonderful day.
Thank you.